Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. This is Drew here, and this is the second video in our Lagoon coaster reviews series, and we are going to be covering, as you saw by the title, Wicked. Now Wicked, I would say most people would say, is probably their second favorite or third favorite coaster in the park, depending on their tastes, and this is going to be quite the controversial review just because of that. I would not put it as my second favorite, or my third favorite, or my fourth favorite, or my fifth favorite, or... Anyways, yeah, I was not the biggest fan of Wicked, but we will get to that in a little bit. So let's start off with just walking up into the park. So you can see this coaster from the right-hand side, and it really kind of stands out in the view for sure. Especially with its vertical spike, which is kind of an odd look for a coaster, I would say. But you can definitely spot it from a pretty far distance, that's for sure. Not anything like Cannibal, of course, because Cannibal is twice the size, realistically. But Wicked you can still see from a distance, for sure, as you walk into the park. Now, once you get to the main T-junction, you're going to take a right, and you are going to keep walking that way until you see Wild Mouse, which then you are going to turn right there and walk past Wild Mouse, Cliffhanger, and the Spider, which are all three pretty great rides. Now Wicked is kind of tucked away in that little corner right there next to Colossus the Fire Dragon, so it is kind of all on its lonesome a little bit, but not too far away from many things. I mean, it's literally like a 15-second walk to Colossus or a 20-second walk to Spider, so you're really not far away from other great attractions. So it does make it a little more enticing to go over to this section of the park because there's just more condensed in that section. Now, starting off with the queue system, I know I've complained about the queue system a lot, at least in previous videos, because it was spilling out all over the place, and I do think they need to add more switchbacks to this queue for sure. It just makes no sense that they don't have more than they do, as well as possibly move the lockers to a better location because the single rider line was taking up that space where the lockers are supposed to be, so it just didn't make any sense to try and, at least for many guests, to try and put their stuff in lockers when it was blocked up completely by the single rider line. So a lot of guests were actually bringing their backpacks in the queue and then just placing them across the exit gateway while they were on the ride. Now this wasn't too much of a problem because there was a bunch of people that weren't doing this, but when there were about 3 or 4 bags in that one spot, it did kind of get to the point where it was a little annoying is all. But the main queue takes some switchbacks, then takes a stairway up above the track itself and then kind of wraps itself around into the station. There's even like a little diagram showing off the LSM systems and where they are. It's really kind of weird, but I liked it. I think it was a nice touch, just being a coaster fan, of course, so I thought that was really cool. But then the station is not very well themed at all. It's just kind of a metal shed, really. I mean, that's about it, which is not the biggest surprise because it is an amusement park. It is a classic amusement park, but I would have liked to see it maybe have a little more than just a metal roof, and that be about it. So operations on this ride were not the best when I was there, that's for sure, especially since these trains can only carry 8 people per train because it is 2 rows of 4 riders in each row, and it really just takes its time. I know they can only get out a train about every 30 seconds or so, but there were some dispatches that were taking 3 to 4 to 5 minutes, even without the booster seats that they could use. And if you didn't know, there are actually booster seats that are usable on this ride for special kids that are under a certain height limit. They can attach booster seats that attach comfortably and perfectly into the seat that allow younger kids to be able to ride Wicked a little earlier than usual. Now moving on to the trains, sitting down in these trains, and I think the biggest complaint about this ride in total is the restraint system. The restraints are kind of like Cannibals, in which they are rectangles, but they are bigger and not very fitting to the human body whatsoever, to the point where it's painful to even try and bring them down. There were also some kind of unnecessary shin guards that I felt on my leg. It might have not been shin guards, I'm not entirely sure, but I just remember a pain in my shins. So I think that was just another part of the restraint hitting my shins. And man, it just digs into you no matter what. One of the ride ops actually stapled me at least farther than I would have liked. It wasn't a true staple. I actually still had a pretty nice gap, but it was still painful because it's so long that it was cutting into my stomach, even though I had a good inch before it hit my legs. So I had room for airtime. I really did, but it still hurt. It was crazy. Like, these restraints are probably some of my least favorite restraints of all time. Like, they are just so unbelievably uncomfortable, even when they are barely even touching you. I mean, I got nice airtime on this ride, but it was still painful in every other section of the track. It's just, oh man. It is definitely probably my biggest complaint about this ride. It just did not feel comfortable whatsoever for me. It just didn't fit the form of a human being, and I mean, I even got airtime on this ride. I will tell you that right now. I got some nice airtime, but that airtime was not enjoyable because of how painful the restraints are. Anyways, moving on to the ride itself, you make a left turn. You kind of stop if you are the second train out of the two, because they do dispatch 2 trains at a time. That's something I forgot to mention with Cannibal. But the second train will wait until the first train gets through the block section that it needs to before it's safe for the next train to go. And immediately after stopping there, you will take another left-hand turn and you go into this launch. This is an LSM launch system that goes up into a vertical spike, which is very bizarre, something that I've never experienced. I've only just experienced my first vertical chain lift in the past year, and that was with hang time. But this was not too different, to be honest. You get this great launch at the beginning of it, and then you just kind of shoot upwards, and it doesn't feel like a launch from then. It just feels like a vertical section of track. It doesn't even really feel like it's a chain lift or anything, or a launch like it is. It just feels like it's part of an inversion or something along those lines. It doesn't feel special to me at all, so that was kind of disappointing. But then you crest this spire and you do get some nice airtime coming down, but then the moment you start to level out, it gets really painful and just uncomfortable. The positive G's push on your restraint really harshly, and I was pushing up as hard as I could. I kept it up, but it was still painful trying to keep that restraint up. And then you have this airtime pop, which should give some great airtime, but it was just painful airtime for me, and just not really enjoyable, just kind of uncomfortable, and just, that was okay. I don't know if that needed to be there, really. So I wasn't too big of fans of those parts of the ride, and that kind of disappointed me. Then you had an overbank turn, which is just a basic overbank turn. Wasn't too thrilled with that. But then you hit probably my favorite part of the ride, which is the 0G roll, which is actually very well done. I really enjoyed the 0G roll, I will give it that. But then you make this turnaround, and then you kind of stop harshly on the brake run, which really kills the momentum, and just really kind of kills the ride itself for me. This whole second half is probably one of my least favorite sections of a coaster that I've ever experienced. I mean, it just seems so unimaginative and just kind of all over the place and just not really well thought out, to be completely honest. It reminds me a lot of what Skyrocket is for its second half at Kennywood. I feel like they are distant cousins or something, because they definitely have a lot of similarities in their layout. And just the drop after the brake run was actually okay, but then everything after that, the bank turns and just going through the tunnel and just ending the ride like that with just the couple bank turns really killed the ride for me. It was just not exciting the moment you hit the brake run, and just it really, really took my expectations and lowered them for the ride itself overall. I was really expecting something at least decent. I knew the restraints were going to be a problem going in, but I didn't think they'd be that big of a problem, and I didn't realize how big of a problem the layout itself would be for me. It just really seemed boring. I was completely bored out of my mind for a good 3/4 of the coaster. And that's not something I usually say. I just didn't care for it. And I know this is totally a personal opinion. Don't take this word as fact. I know Taylor from Coaster Studios said it was running bad that day. He said it was the worst ride he's ever had on it. So, I mean, it may change for me in the future. I only did get one ride because the line went to over an hour or so for the rest of the day. And heck, I could have just gotten the worst ride possible on it, and maybe it's a lot better than I experienced, but out of the one experience I've had on it, it just really was not enjoyable whatsoever. I was pretty bored on it. My two favorite parts of the ride were the zero-G roll and the initial launch, not the vertical part of the launch, but the beginning of the launch, if that tells you anything. It just really kind of bored me. And I know that's probably a surprise to a lot of Lagoon goers that really enjoy the ride, and I know a lot of people do. And I respect that in every way. For me, it didn't suit what I was expecting whatsoever. It didn't seem enjoyable to me. And it's really definitely at the bottom of my list at Lagoon. Not all the way at the bottom, that's for sure, but it just really wasn't what it should be, at least in my eyes, and I really didn't enjoy it that much. So I gotta go with my final rating, and this is probably gonna be a lot lower than you guys think, but a 4 out of 10. And I know it's pretty harsh, but I only did get one ride on it, and it was supposedly one of the worst rides that I could have had for sure. I did sit in the back row on the right side, just because the single rider line was not operated the best. They kept forgetting about us a lot. But yeah, just to let you guys know, Wicked, 4 out of 10 for me. I just did not enjoy it. I really didn't. I'm sure if I ride it again, possibly in the near future, I might like it more. Maybe it runs better at the beginning of the season, but when I rode it in late October, I was not a fan. That is for sure. I hope you guys enjoyed this review at least a little bit. I hope it was at least a little insightful, and I know me giving a negative review is not very common. I'm usually pretty positive about my coasters, unless it's something I really just did not enjoy, and that's very rare for me. But hopefully I can ride this soon and maybe change my mind on it. You never know. Some coasters change day to day, so possibly Wicked might make it into my top 15, which, I mean, I doubt that anyways, but you never know. It might change in the future, and if it does, I will let you guys know. But thank you guys for watching, and I will make sure to have more reviews coming from Lagoon, including Puff. Yeah, I'm gonna do it, I guess. But until then, we'll see you on the next ride.